Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's the peasant, it's the prodigious, the Parliament Professor at Proclamation News and Gatherings. We're studying Investigating the Social World 2. It's part of my module, DD 103. One chapter, the book is edited by Deborah H., Drake, Andy Morris, Alan Shipman, and Katy. I'm coming to my second academic year. Chapter 2, The Politics of Environment by Joe Smith. Politics of Environment by Joe Smith. In the introduction, on page 33, the natural and the social environments continue interact. People and their societies are shaped by the landscapes, climate conditions, and natural resources around them, and these in turn are reshaped by human activity, as discussed in chapter 1. This chapter continues the theme and shows how environmental issues have developed over time. It examines how the environmental movement developed and how later scientific research emerged that prompted a more global imagination about these issues. It explores big questions such as what motivates environmental concern? What are the issues environmentalists care about or environmental organisations campaign on? What scale issues do they typically work? When we talk about environmental concern, talking about wildlife, for instance, got wildlife, and they want to build a block of, I don't know, even a council estate, and build a council estate, they've got wildlife to think about, or a bit of farmland they want to build on. It's environmental concerns, isn't it? Lack of resources. They can build houses to populate people. They've got white. That's why it comes into politics, a debate. Is it appropriate? Do we need to house more people to get rid of more farmland, or more, The chapter includes discussion of conflict in rights, and the relationships between humans and the non-human world, in the present day and in the future. This chapter will explore the deep historical and cultural roots of contemporary environmentalism. The influence of new research is shaping a global environmental imagination over the last few weeks. The distinctions between environmentalism as a social movement and the broader policy and political responses to the global environmental change research. The value of concepts of social scientists, including the concept of independence, in relation to environmental change. Section 1, Environmentalism, a new way of looking at the world. Presents a short history of ideas about the Western world changing relationship with its environment from the 17th century onwards. Has anyone been up to Stonehenge? Stonehenge. Talk about environmentalism. Imagine they wanted to build a big building industrial estate where Stonehenge is. It's probably one of the oldest recorded. It's an old castle, wasn't it, Stonehenge? Are they going to get builders' rights? No, they're not. They're not. It's derelict land. They're not going to get builders' rights. So this is where things like this come into consideration. Page 34. It's one of the oldest listed castles in the country. So they're not going to build an industrialisation on top of Stonehenge. Section 2. The emergence of a global environmental imagination explores the role of research or policy in understanding the significance of environmental problems. Living in an independent world, new ethics. New politics explores the concept of independence. Page 35, environmentalism. A new way at looking at the world. Environmental issue, environmentalism, and the environment are all terms that are widely used. In this activity, it asks you to pause to think a bit harder about what the words mean. You get environmentalism and environment. It's a thoughtful process, isn't it? Environmentalism. thought process how they're going to debate to keep it the environment safe. I'm assuming. You can Google it to make sure I'm running along the right terminology, which I'm pretty sure is something along them lines. Something that needs to be debated. Environmentalism. Take a few minutes to note down some environmental issues that particularly concern you. Think about what scale they relate to. In other words, are they more about local, regional, national, or global concerns? Or is this the wrong way of thinking about them? You may want to look back at some materials that engage with ideas about scale in Block 2. This is where scientists, take up farmland, but there's other ways we can produce food. There's other ways you can produce food or other resources, such that maybe they can chop a rainforest down to build houses. There's other ways they can grow trees. Is there anyone else in the land where they can grow trees? Get the wood from that we need. It's got to be. It's got to be you know, always a conclusion to the end of the debate. We're taking this farmland over, but we can produce food in a different area. That's what these environmentalisms come into, isn't it? Discussion. Everyone will have a unique perspective on this issue. Here is one response given to this question. When I'm walking to my allotment, I might be annoyed by the fumes from a line of cars at the junction, or enchanted by a rare sighting of the kingfisher along the brook. Both of these are very local environmental concerns. They leave me wanting to see less dependence on cars in cities, but also glad that at least some of the wild places have been protected from development, even in cities. But when I watch or read the news, I'm reminded about global environmental issues, particularly climate change and losses of biodiversity. Talking about eco-friendly cars, they're trying to make it a bit more. You just want to talk about amicable and reciprocated. They try to make it a bit more friendly, by putting eco-friendly cars in, less contamination, less global warming. Thinking about it, absolute society as a whole, pollution. Environmental groups to campaign on a wide range of issues, on scales ranging from very local to global. They have habits, such as particular wetlands or forests, and particular species such as orangutans, whales, and endangered birds. An international body might campaign to protect the Amazon, while a local wildlife group might try to protect a meadow or wood from development. Hope you can understand when I'm, emphasizing my own knowledge into the scripture, because it brings out, a good reader, good scientific reader. I'm emphasizing what I know, which is actually happening globally. Read about it daily on the news. We see it ourselves as well in person. Such campaigns have existed for decades. In some cases, I mean, over the years, you see the old Vauxhall Nova, sound like hairdryer going down the road with all the toxic fumes going out of the car. Now they're bringing out eco-friendly cars, putting a ban on old-fashioned cars like that. For more than a century, in more recent years, environmental groups have worked on broader issues, including climate change and resource depletion. These are global concerns and implementations stretch into the future as well as across the planet. Environmentalism and industrialization, page 36. Ideas about the environment hazard go back much further than contemporary concerns about hazardous waste on climate change. Environment historians who have studied the late Middle Ages point to measure introduced to manage air quality in London on the water quality of the Thames. For example, by the mid to late 17th century, the writer John Evelyn was drawing attention to the air pollution in London in his book on the city's chronic air problems published in 1651, and the hazard deforestation in His Majesty's dominions. Evelyn's book, Silver or a Discourse of the Forest is published in 1662, was a response to fears among naval leaders that deforestation threatened their access to timber for ships, and hence the nation's security. Evelyn's writings show the population and resource depletion were raised as issues several centuries ago. However, it was the explosive growth of cities, consumption of resources, and larger scale movements of people and goods associated with industrial revolution. From the late 18th century onwards, that gave impetus to the new ways of thinking about humanity's relationship with its environment. The effects of those changes could be seen, smelt, and heard. Industrialization was dirty and noisy, and dramatically transformed landscapes. The Romantic movement in the arts and literature can be understood as a direct reaction to these changes. For the Romantic poets such as Coleridge and Wordsworth, nature was a resource of beauty, spiritual renewal, and fulfillment. It held the potential to transform human experience. I mean, like I was saying earlier, before we got into this chat, about 6 hours ago, when I was reading this, going for a brisk walk through a country park or your local park, even along the beach to find mindfulness. It's like a bit of a romance to, even if you're on your own, it's a bit of romance, escape from escapism. Call it escapism, escape from reality. So, just you hear that the sea breeze hitting the wall, hitting the rocks, that lovely, that nice sound, reminiscing through your ears. Feel like makes you feel like you're free from pain, free from anxiety, free from debt relief. Although you go back home, you're back to square one again. That's what it's like when you're on holiday. You're away from all the stress. Page 37. Fum ifum, or Fumifugum, the inconvenience of the APR, smoke of London, dissipated together with foam remedies humbly proposed by JEFQ. To him scared majesty, this is probably, I don't know, it might be Welsh. A little page from John Elvin's book on London's chronic air pollution problems. These same influence generated new ideas in politics, most certainly in William Morris's 1834 to 1896. The distinct brand of socialism, Morris is best known today as a designer, whose work expresses his belief that the pleasure that resides in art of identical with what which dwells in nature. He was developed these ideas in the context of his worships in London, the world's first large-scale city, which he described as a sordid or a loathsome place. Morris felt that the poison of riches was leaching beauty out of the land, and, and warned that green and beautiful places are still left in the countryside of England, but the hand of decay is on them. Henderson, 1978, page 61. I mean, I don't know if when you read Queen Elizabeth the First, not Queen Elizabeth II, Queen Elizabeth the First scripture, it's very like William Shakespeare, the way she writes, very with a meaningful vote when she's trying to put her point of view across to a nation, and then it makes it stand out when you can really be creative with your writing. I do a lot of writing myself. I wouldn't say I'm as good as them. I'm quite tangible with my words. I can string a great sentence together especially even more so when I'm typing. When you're typing, you become more creative in your way of thinking. Page 38. Initially, Morris supported the work of what we are today called conservation bodies, such as the Commons Preservation Society, which was created to preserve beautiful open spaces for everyone's enjoyment. It is interesting to note that this society, as with other early conservation, heritage, and environmental protection organisations, it drew on a combination of legal and publicity tools to try to advance its cause. Modern environmentalists use much the same mix. This was shown in 2014 in the UK when the government sought to introduce legalisation, allowing the selling of nationally owned forests. Campaigners enjoyed both lawyers and media specialists, as well as public relations techniques to maximise impact. They were successful in halting the proposed legislation. However, William Moore's contemporary Robert Somerville noted that the Common uh, Preservation Society's scattered efforts, resulting in occasional and hurried glimpse of strange beauty, were woefully inadequate. One of Morris's responses was that the arts should be based in nature. He also argued that the future art would have to rest in the working class. These two ideas together explain his intense commitment to handcrafted objects. Morris gave the impulses behind the Romantic movement a political edge by proposing that was the working class could only be the future guardians of art if the conditions and purpose of labour were transformed. Page 39. In the book News from Nowberry, Morris offers a vision of utopian society of centred craft workers who have been set free from their industrial capitalism and its oppressive social structures. Do you think I've been set free from their industrial capitalization, capitalism? Sorry, absolutely, and its oppressive social structures and money. The book combines ethics, aesthetics, ideas about the nature and socialism, and a catalogue of the evils of capitalism, by contrast with workers under capitalism. More essential character, Old Hammond, is free, happy and energetic. Morris is uncompromising. Apart from the desire to produce beautiful things, the leading passion of my life has been and is hatred of modern civilization. Think of it. What it all to an end, and a counting house on top of a cinder heap, with a Whig committee dealing out champagne to the rich and margarine to the poor in such convenient proportions as would make all men contented together, though the pleasure of the eyes has gone from the world. A key element of Morris' thinking is prominent in environmentalism. Today is the way he considered future generations and felt that their interests should be represented in the in the present. One example of the thinking is offered in a speech he made arguing for the page 40 for the preservation of old buildings, in which he suggests that we are only the trustees for those who come for us. Less radical contemporaries of Morris pursued more practical steps to protect places and species from the consequences of economic development. In the UK, the National Trust and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds were set up. The purchase of land offered these bodies a direct means of protecting nature and heritage sites. In the USA, the Sierra Club, a conservation organisation, was founded and campaigns were initiated to create protected areas all over the developed world. These goals were pursued by the gathering of influential support, including from the newly wealthy, who had been benefited greatly from precisely the economic development that was putting so much pressure on the nature. The outcomes varied widely in the United States. A national park and a publicly owned and tightly protected described more loosely regulated areas containing much privately property, but restrictions on how it can be used. Your early study from the Cargnons of the National Park highlighted in the ways which these protected areas in the UK can serve as places of residence, work and leisure simultaneously. We're looking at conflicts between conservation access and resource use. Historian Mark Spence argues that national parks serve a microcosm microcosm for the history of the conflict of misunderstanding that has long characterized the unequal relations between the United States and the native people. In the early North American conversationists were particularly concerned to protect what they understood as a Pyrrhistine empty wilderness. The first national park and in the United States, the Yellowstone came about in 1872. Anyone heard about Yellowstone? I never heard of it before. I might research it on the net after this. This saw it designated a public land. However, that was only possible by ignoring the long history of the use of land by the Native Americans. These peoples, who had been driven off lands such as the Yellowstone, did not think of them at, as wild at all, but as landscapes they had managed to provide food and other resources. These people that go into these parks, talking about social, this is sociology, society. It's only going to be the rich and the middle class that can afford to go to these parks and things and stuff, isn't it? The poor cannot afford to have such luxuries. So, when they have these debates, the poor people ain't going to be benefiting from, are they? That's why it's important. I say adult learning, try and be the best you can be. Take as many courses as you can to get where you need to be in life to support your family. However, it is important to note that the relationship between land, law, and people is dynamic. The meaning that the public parks of North America hold for people and the use they might put be put to were not set in stone in the late 19th century. Debates continue today about the unjust nature of the designation of these people when they were created. Native Americans who also use the term First Nations to describe themselves, particularly in the context of campaigning and negotiations about treaties. How they use their leading role in these debates to gain increased influence over the use of some of these protected areas. Since the late 20th century, the First Nations peoples and their representatives have won more influence over a number of key issues. This has resulted in access to sacred sites, renewal of relationships and ancestral homelands, and a re- revitalization of substance-based knowledge and practices, not to mention the historical significance of reclaiming stolen lands, as well as contests in the use of sovereignty arrangements of national parks. First Nations have often been very active in challenging. Page 42, ladies and gents, keep up with me if you're on the module. It's good to, even if you're not studying the module, it's good to have, to see what lies in between these politicians, but, even councillors, what they have to go through to get where they need to be in life. Page 42, destructive land uses parks outside and in establishing their own parks. In 1984, the Noof First Nations people mounted a huge protest on the steps of the British Columbia legislature, calling for the preservation of Mears Island from logging. The First Nations won a British Columbia Supreme Court cases that ordered that the island should not be logged. Mears was made as a tribal park by its owners, the Tlaokiat and Ushat First Nations. A member of the First Nation that set up the tribal park made a sign that sounded a sign at the entrance. He said at its unveiling, this is a sign that's going to be affecting people for a long time, helping people understand the Tlaokiat are here. People helping people that don't want to respect our homelands and our waters. Helping people know that this belongs to people that are handing it over to our grandchildren. Campaigns such as this show that very way people think about the non-human natural environment is often shaped by and shapes, and the way They think about identity, history, sovereignty, rights, and the future of their communities. However, the extraction of natural resources from the First Nation lands can also generate debate and conflict within the communities, given the opportunities for revenue and jobs they represent. I mean, this, you know what it's like at the minute, the conflict between kind of various people outreaching, trying to have debates, trying to fight against the government. People are still in protest, trying to fight against it, trying to fight for their own rights. Cowart argues that substantial issues remain to be resolved about the nature of the past enclosure of spaces to create public parks. The cases explored by Cowart raise interesting and important questions about who the public is that it is served by the parks, who is sovereign within them. In other words, who has control and ultimate authority over the land, and how very long environmental interests are best served. In his article about the relationship between indigenous peoples in North America, the US and the Canadian governments, and the way land is organised and used, Cal points to the potential that tribal parks such as the one created by Mears Island might hold for positive compromises. He finds that just after this chapter, I'm going to have a good discussion with you. In the hands of indigenous communities, land trust and cultural conservation easements have provided practical ways to reassert rights to traditional treaties, territories, and in the process to create meaningful and productive relationships with non-indigenous landowners and conservation organisations. I mean, we talk about human rights, aren't we? Talk about human rights and going with the sovereignty of the land. Obviously, Parliament, all the politicians, all the government, and the law authorities saying COVID-19, rule of six, staying your own home. Then we've got, on the other hand, protesters backed up by well knowledgeable people. Some of these protest meetings, got some of the top, some of these people done their degree, they've got done their law degree and stuff. They know they're just as intelligent as the next politician. I'm probably not blowing my own trumpet. Before I even start the course, I've been reading politics for a long time. And a lot of the politicians have sat and done all the paperwork, what I'm doing. I felt like before, obviously studying off my own back, constitutional law, which is politics anyway, same as what I'm doing now pretty much. Criminal law, family law, off my own back. So I was well endowed to sit as a member of parliament, especially how Johnny Corbyn would have got his seat gained back in them days. Probably no different to what I know today before him starting this, to be fair, yeah. So you got, that's what I'm saying, you got these politicians and then you got these other people doing protests, which are like talking about conspiracy theory, everyone meeting up without COVID mask on. But where do you sit? Where do you lie? I mean, I'm studying politics. I want to be somebody. I want to earn a living for my family. But I'm trying to do it the best amicable way, in an etiquette sense, to work with the government rather than go against. But where can I draw the line to say? Because I've got normal human beings, like as what obviously etiquette sense. I'll be working with politicians, and then I've got normal human beings, family members, friends I grew up with, and old associates I used to be around. Good people, nice people, working class. Where do I draw the line to say COVID-19 could be 100% accurate, or I think it's conspiracy? Whichever side of that fence I want to sit. I don't want to say it because I could be throwing away something I'm working hard towards. What I think. Sometimes my thoughts, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are my ways. I'm confused. I don't want to say what I think because you can upset. Uh, yeah, upset a minority, which is what I want to do. So I'm not going to get into that. But you know where I'm coming from with it, don't you? Anyway, page 43. You can imagine all the politicians they've got to go with the sovereignty, haven't they? They've got 9 times out of 10. Page 43. 1.3. The US conservatism. I mean, Boris he's had a big one, hasn't he, with his Brexit. He's stuck by his word to a sense. I'm not quite sure what's going on with that. The Brexit and the EU trade deal agreement at the moment. I think there was almost thinking about leaving it, and I don't know. It sounds like it could be come back round again. So who knows? It's one of them ones for them without a trade policy agreement. A leading American conservatism, conservationist, Ralph Waldo Emerson, had travelled in Europe and met the Romantic poets. His 1836 book, Nature, argued that the unity of the nature, science and spiritually. It summarized a philosophy or religion that termed ten, oh, transcendent, transcendent, right, let's say it again, transcendentalism, my goodness, wherein nature offered proof of the presence of the divine in all things. A follower of Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, sought to live out these ideas and simplify by living on nature for 2 years in the wilds. Shows a replica of the site of the hut he lived in during this period. Resulting account of his time living next to the Walden Pond in Maine opens thus. When I wrote the following pages, I lived alone, in the woods, a mile from any neighbour, in a house which I built myself, and earned my living by the labour of my own hands. Must be nice to own your house in the middle of nowhere, but at the same time, you're watching scary movies. Come up Christmas, I'll be thinking that is someone going to come towards my house. Page 44. Before his concerns are very selectively remembered today. He promoted civil disobedience and critiqued industrialised labour. To this extent, he shared much in common with Morris. However, his champion of individualism, self-sufficiency and hard work, alongside his conviction in the spiritual benefits of preserving natural wilderness, have been better remembered in the US context and speak to a distinctively US ideology. The spiritual stance of his thinking fed into the movement of national parks, which the proponents saw not just as a good in themselves, but as a vital to the public health of urban populations. During the 1930s and 1940s, Ansel Adams, one of the most popular photographers of the 20th century, gave visual expression to the idea that the United States' apparent wilderness offered a resource of awe and wonder. Adams' photos were shaped up in a way many US citizens think about and have represented ideas of the US wilderness ever since. However, the creation of heavily protected parks was aimed at more than preserving, sometimes from the past. Many national parks movement were concerned to offer the current and the future inhabitants of the country's fast-growing cities access to clean, fresh, inspiring outdoor spaces. Offers just one of many thousand examples of images by nature photographers that pay district homage to Adams. A hint of the value of the parks hold for contemporary most urban US citizens a century after they were created. Did you know a photograph could tell 1,000 pictures? Imagine, right? This has got nothing to do with it. See that there? There's a picture like that where in Wales, and they've got not Parliament, they've got Castel Coch. Castel, that's how you pronounce it. Castel Coch, it's spelt. But it's Castel Coch, how the Welsh pronounce it. And over that river is the Welsh Valley. The Welsh Valley. So that picture would not just be Castel Coch. They've got back of Castel Coch, you've got a vineyard. Not only are they making money from the Welsh Valley, it's water, isn't it? They're making money from the Welsh Valley, and they got a grapevine that brews wine. That picture is like a multi-million-pound picture. It's a globalisation business, isn't it? You got the water from the Welsh Valley, going to earn them absolute tonfold of money just through that Castel Cosh. Same as Parliament. You think Parliament? Why overseas Parliament? You got London Thames. You got Big Ben. You got everything. There's a lot of money goes into that, especially for tourist attraction as well. You got all the statues outside Nelson Mandela, Winston Church. Well, Winston Church ain't there no more. Some inappropriate people pulled it down for whatever reason. But I'm just saying, for instance, a picture. You look at a picture, it could look be nothing, but it's the surroundings, the time of day. Like that. It's in it's in winter. It could be it could be the Alps. It could be just around the corner. Could be the Alps, a slope where a lot of people tourists go, a tourist attraction. These photographers really think about the depiction, their picture they're taking. This isn't part of my study, but I'm just thinking, like ahead, how some of these picturesque think of their photographs. When I paint a picture, sometimes I really think about what I'm painting. Why am I painting this picture? What's the story behind it? Sometimes I paint cartoons. I think, that'd be quite a good graphic design for Christmas come up, birthdays, whatever. I'm thinking about a future side business. Snake River, amateur photographer's work that pays homage to Ansel Adams' photography. US conversationists and the artists and the writers who all four promoted their ideas, such as Thoreau and Adams, did not much to influence of the thinking of environmentalism. Around the world, indeed, it is much easier to trace their influence than the socialism of Morris, which is concerned for everyday experiences of the urban working class. Adam images of pristine nature of the Thoreau's writings from his solitary cabin confirm that from the 20th century environmental movement was as much about protecting the environment from people as it was protecting it for people. The environmentalism viewed cities and everyday human life not as part of the environment, but as ever-present threat to a fragile nature. As in Evelyn's time, increasing numbers of people gathered in city settlements, creating pollution and resource pressures that threaten the environment. Yet 20th century environmental groups tended to view cities and society as a source of threats to a separate nature rather than as themselves the subject of analysis of campaigning. Activity 2, page 45. Are the individuals that have ever shaped the environmentalism more concerned with the past, present, or future? You might want to refer to some of the people referenced in section 1, such as Morris, Thoreau, and Adams. Looking at discussion for this is a difficult question to answer, even if you have a great deal more information to hand than is presented in this chapter. It is possible to say that Morris drew heavily of idealized notion of the past to picture an utopian picture of the novel news from nowhere. Thoreau is drawn on the notions of the idyllic past when he seeks to simplify his life and rely on his own wits when living for 2 years at Alden Pond. Although clearly wants to influence ideas about society should live in the future, Adam photographs can suggest that his ideas about national parks are simply about conserving them in a particular pristine state. In fact, the US national parks movement was influenced by a desire to give the populations of the United States fast-growing cities access to fresh, clean air in the wilderness. Any of you guys living in the US, think about your surroundings. Places like Colorado, a bit more spaced out, aren't they? A bit more spaced out. I'm I've never been to America, but I'm thinking about Colorado. I'm thinking a bit of an industrialization sort of place. It has to really spread out. I'm thinking. I've never been there, so I've never looked at the map of the United States. But Colorado, I've seen some things you watch Route 66 films on TV. I'm thinking I may have seen Colorado in my imagination or in a film. I can imagine it being quite like that. Don't know if anyone's from Colorado, my car spot with YouTube, or not from Colorado, but knows America and lives there, and even a place like Tennessee, I'm thinking the same sort of thing. Don't know why. I know people from Tennessee, but I'm just thinking maybe that's an industrialization sort of community. Summary: this short history of the ideas about the Western world relationship with its environment has shown that concerns about environmental degradation stretch back to the 17th century. Concern increased with industrialization and expanding urbanization in the 19th and 20th centuries. This section introduced ideas about conflicts over land uses and the emergence of the new forms of legal protection of the natural world, including the creation of national parks. Like I said, national parks are good, aren't they? If you've got a working class family, a middle class family that can afford it for their loved ones. Absolutely. Would you say it's working what I'm doing? Because I'm reading, I've got a good depiction, I've got a good answer. I do my radio as well. It's working, isn't it? Because in my current circumstances at the minute, I can only get philanthropist job. So me reading, giving more advice in the Citizen Advice Bureau, and they do that for a philanthropist job, and that's all I'm going to get. So what I can do on here, I could serve on my cast box. I get 2,000 listeners a week, and like I said, in Citizen Advice, they get 7 customers in a day, and I do 1 day a week because Citizen Advice where I live is only open on a Thursday. So what I can do in a week, serving 20,000 listeners, is more benefit in going to Citizen Advice asking for some advice. 9 times out of 10, it's either going to be alienated parents or the women wanting to get protection order put away from their father, or the father wanting to get mediation rights. That's 9 times out of 10. Sometimes sometimes it can be people being bullied at work. Why would you go seek advice? All the information is on the net. Some people haven't got the brain capacity to think outside the box. But if you're here listening in, I can give you all the details you need to know without wasting your time. Because not 9 times out of 10, not all the citizen advice people have the information that I know. Because I've been through a life of purgatory, 37 years. I can give you all. My friend, one of my dear friends, partially disabled, um, but she's fit and well. She tries to manage her own. Does well. She works for the NHS, HR. Been discriminated at work. I said, and I'll give her the details to the tribunal to back her rights up at work. She needs a break. She's got bad legs. She's in a car accident. She needs a X amount of breaks, X, Y, and Z. She's disabled. The court being bullied is in her favour. She's partially disabled. Should be catered for. Should be looked after. Been bullying at work act is a thing on the. Google it. I sent it the information over. Bullying at work act. She's been taken to tribunal trying to sack her, but in her defence, they can't do nothing. Page 47 of a global environmental imagination. Through the course of the 20th century, the global north saw fast-paced economic development in step with the great advances in technology and science, and steady increase of both human numbers and rates of consumption. Above all, the cities and towns, these changes meant the new forms of environmental pollution were being generated, but also that science researchers were capable of better understanding the issues at stake. Both the experience of environmental and social costs associated with environmental degradation and the newly emerging environmental sciences contributed to new ways of thinking about environmental change and humanity's role in it. The widening resonance of the local instance. 20th century economic development brought security and leisure to many more people, but the pollution it brought with it also started to take some of the fun out of their life. Evidence of the pollution took several forms. Some could only be traced in the wake of a careful research. However, city dwellers did not need scientists to tell them they were under threat. They could taste it in the air. Particular weather conditions would leave them with choked by the air pollution. The combination of the use of solid fuel, especially coal, in the homes and the for electricity generation, together with the rapid growth in the road transport, created smogs, a term we describe as combination of smoke and fog. Dense smogs were experienced in large cities and had been notorious since the late 19th century. That's why we got the catalytic converters, eco-friendly. cars. 1952, the combination of weather conditions and increased use of coal led to what has been been nicknamed the pea super fogs. There was a sharp increase in death rates that public health researchers directly associated with the air pollution. It was not possible for public health researchers to establish precisely the number of deaths above the normal rate, and many of those who died were already suffering. Hello there, for this. How you doing? Um, spike in numbers dying. No, spike in numbers already suffering from respiratory systems, but also the spike in numbers dying was clearly once all available data had been gathered. This marked increase in death rates, supported by clear evidence and the cause and effect of combined with media pressure and widespread direct experience of the smogs drove the government to legislate for the measures that would improve air quality. Hi, Fishak from India. Nice to meet you, buddy. Stay tuned. We're just doing a UK read up on my politics, UK politics, my friend. So I've got hiccups. Page 48. Activity 3. Figures 28, 29 and 210 are three different kinds of evidence about London's smogs in 1952. We've got a photo, newspaper article and graph. How do they each help tell a story of this significant event and what ways do they differ? Looking at fog. Remember, I don't know if you guys remember playing sport in the fog? You're kicking a ball from 30 yards out. As a goalkeeper, going to see the ball. You're guaranteed to score from miles out. I remember scoring many lovely rockets. Look like David Beckham shots. I just think I was the best striker in the world. The goalkeeper can't see the ball coming. It's bound to go in and hit the target. But you couldn't see the target as well as much as the goalkeeper can see the ball. Photograph of the football goalkeeper peering into smog instantly tells a story about the direct physical experience of the smogs. It is also a human interest story of the central character engaged in a particular sport that readers can identify with. Newspaper report relies on a very different kind of storytelling, rooted in comparison with the past experience of the factual evidence gathered by the reporter. I mean, as a kid, I think they just used us as they used us as animals. We got treated like animals. Played football in the smog. We're going to test our animals, see if they can hit the ball, hit the target in the smog. That's what I did. I said this before when we're talking about compassion. Most scariest thing as a kid, we all had compassion for sport, but the most scariest thing, really, thinking about looking back at it, is playing sport. The things that we got put through as a kid, we got abused by our teachers, we got abused by our parents, we got abused, not only in a funny sense, we did. If we've all been kids ourselves. We got played hockey in the smog, getting hit in the head with a hockey ball in the smog. Not that happened to me, but imagine, you can't see the ball coming. It's going to hit you square in between your eyes. Never happened to me, but really, realistically, we did. We played rugby in the smog. We played football in the smog. We've done all kinds of sport in the smog. We've done bung racing in the smog if we could drive at that young age. Don't have to school teachers. We got abused. Anyway, the headline, however, has been carefully composed to attract the attention of the smoke and the air. Through the relevant period in December 1952 offers an even more analytical form of evidence. Rooted in careful research, such graphs can lend impact to a newspaper's story, but are also influential in convincing politicians, policymakers, and medical professionals of the need to act. And read this newspaper article, worse than 1866. The cholera, deaths after fog. The rise in deaths in the week after London's Great Fog early in December was greater than in the worst week of the cholera epidemic in 1866. This is disclosed in a report of the Health Committee in London County Council, which will be considered by the Council on Tuesday. The committee reports that the figures recorded by the Council's observation station at the County Hall for the smoke and sulphur dioxide pollution of the atmosphere in December 7 to 8. Do you reckon that's what we're having now? Could be something quite similar, couldn't it? Are the highest which can be treated in records, which date back to 1932 in addition for the 6 day period from December the 5th. You know what happens in these kind of smoggy conditions? Pneumonia. Exactly what COVID is, isn't it? Just with a different, with a twist, with a name, just to make a few more quid. When the atmospheric condition was particularly bad, the temperature remained considerably below normal. Deaths registered in London rose from 945 for the week ending December 6 to 2,484 the following week. The general death rate is the later week was slightly greater than associated with the Surf fog in 1873. I think I'm hitting something, I'm hitting, the nail on the head. I've always said about pneumonia, I think it's changed its name. And comparable with the rates experienced at the peak of mortality of major epidemics. The excess of deaths over normal per million inhabitants for the week ended in December 1873. Peak of fog was 243. The excess for the week ended in August the 4th. 1866, peak of the last great cholera epidemic was 426, and the excess for the week of ending December 13th, 1952 was 445. The corresponding figure for the worst week of the influenza pandemic of 1918 was 785. No particular age. The sudden increase in deaths in the week ended in December the 13th, 1952, although more pronounced among hot babies and the elderly, was not confirmed to persons of any particular age. The increase was associated almost entirely with disorders of the circulatory or respiratory system. Compared with the average of the previous 3 weeks, deaths from bronchitis increased 10 times, from influenza 7 times, from pneumonia, nearly 5 times from pulmonary tuberculosis, 4.5 times for respiratory diseases, 6 times, and from heart and circulatory disorders, nearly 3 times. The attention of the Minister of Health is being drawn to the in statistics in a connection with investigations which government departments concerned may be asking. The report describes the cause of the fog as almost complete absence of the movement and low surface temperature, which an inversion whereby the normal upward air circulation by convection currents was arrested, with the result that smoke, sulfur oxides, and other air contaminants increased. I'm gonna leave that there, ladies and gents, because I'm debating this page because like I said it's pneumonia 2 or 3 pages back. No, yeah, about 2 or 3 pages back. I said that was pneumonia. I thought I said it months ago, but while I was reading that to you, I was saying about the conspiracy theory of it all. What do I think of it? I think, you know, obviously we can't argue with science, we can't argue with NHS. It's their job, but it's also their job to be paid and twist things, isn't it? You want to sell a newspaper, you want to sell something to the audience, give it another name, give it a twist, make people think, oh my goodness, something else to be worried about. It's going to earn money. That's what media is all about. Selling a newspaper. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying they're wrong, but I know propaganda and I know fake news. Anything, these world champions, boxers, I've sparred them and they're world champions. Well, if I'm sparring world champion, but I'm not a world champion, well, where's the makeup in that? Where's the makeup in devices? It's about it's all money, keeping the good ones in, letting the bad ones that are really good not make it. I'm not bad. I wasn't a bad one. Just I didn't have the money, the backing. I didn't have the support. Some of these world champions absolutely It's a whole different ball game what I'm talking about. You know where I'm going with it though, don't you? Same sort of scenario. People can twist things, make money off lies, basically. The very different kind of risk of human health created by modern life was much more difficult to identify. I mean, the only thing that I did wrong was give up. That's the only thing I've done. I'm not going to give up on what I enjoy. I enjoy reading, and it's not harming anyone. It's keeping me busy. In 1956, the Japanese fishing port of Manatma gave its name of a neurological disease that evidently killed at least 3,000 people in the two regions of the country. Research identified the industrial process that had resulted in the leaking of mercury compounds into the bay was responsible. For here, the mercury made its way into human diets by travelling along the food chain in a community where fish and seafood formed a very important part of the diet and local economy. The toxic metal had gradually built up the bodies of shellfish and fish that were then consumed by humans. It took nearly 2 decades to win the compensation for the victims. Minamata was a company town, whereas the Chiso Corporation had huge economic and political influence. The Chiso Corporation opposed campaigns for compensation, their defense centering on the uncertainties about the case and effect. However, it was proven through careful medical and environmental research that industrial pollution organisations in Chiso's plants have resulted in mercury getting into the food chain. I'm going to leave it there, ladies and gents. Thank you all again. Give me some acknowledgement. It helps, you know. I know, like, you could be watching anything on telly, but sometimes to watch facts, somewhat facts, I will say somewhat facts because it is somewhat facts and somewhat propaganda. But you can learn more by listening here than you will on Home and Away because that's all fiction. Anyway, thanks, ladies and gents. I appreciate you giving me some support. It's been amazing. Even you guys on Castbox coming in, listening, subscribing every day, come listening. It means a lot. Slowly building its audience. And you never know, if you've got your young children, I might get them into. If you've got your children listening, I might get them into a bit of thinking I could better myself when I'm older, get myself in university. I hope I can give some good inspiration. I want to be a good inspiration for listeners. I think I can inspire others to better themselves. Even if it's not university, there's other courses. I'm doing a business management course on the side of on the back of my degree. There's other things you can do, other courses you can do, administration, do HR. There's other things, other routes you can do. It's all free, funded by the government. You're in a pandemic, you're gonna lose. Might be coming into a furlough. Why not do these courses? Anyway, guys, thank you. Take care. God bless. Try and better yourself for the future when we come out of this lockdown. You've got probably a handful of time and probably another year we're going to be locked down, so make the most of it. Take care. God bless. And see you tomorrow.